My entitled daughter got a tattoo behind my back, so I sold her dream car. I raised my daughter Claire to be perfect. She was scouted for commercials as a child, made straight A's, did every chore without complaint. The ideal daughter. When she was 16, she started dating her boyfriend Ryan and saving for her dream car, a white Mazda MX-5 she'd wanted since middle school. Then she asked about getting matching tattoos with Ryan, a tiny star on her ankle. I shut that down immediately. You're never getting a tattoo. That's final. She dropped it, thankfully. My values had held strong. After 2 years of working, she'd saved $8,000, half of what she needed. She was devastated she couldn't afford it before college. So I surprised her, matched her savings, bought the car myself, and gave it to her 3 weeks before her 18th birthday. She cried with joy, thanked me for hours. I thought she'd learned gratitude, respect, obedience. On her 18th birthday, she left in the morning and returned that evening. When I asked where she'd been, she said casually, "Getting that tattoo I told you about. I'm an adult now. My body, my money, my choice." I was livid. First time she'd ever defied me. "You need to apologize for violating my trust, then break up with Ryan. He's clearly manipulating you. I'm leaving for college in 2 weeks. I won't be under your roof anymore. You can't control me." That's when I realized I'd been too soft. Never properly punished her. She needed to learn consequences. The car. I'd paid half. Technically bought it myself from the dealership. It was mine to take back. I called the dealer. He'd give me 90% back. Good enough. Next morning, the tow truck arrived. Claire ran outside screaming, "This is my car! You can't do this! This is your punishment for lying and deceiving me." She literally stood in front of the truck, sobbing. I gave the driver $100 to keep going after I dragged her away. She collapsed on the driveway, crying. I went inside and transferred her $8,000 back to her account. She didn't lose money, just the car. A fair punishment for disrespect. But she hasn't spoken to me since. It's been 2 weeks. She doesn't acknowledge my existence, won't even look at me. She leaves for college tomorrow and we haven't exchanged a single word. Her mother, my ex-wife, called yesterday. "What did you do?" Claire says she's never coming home again. She got a tattoo. I taught her about consequences. By stealing her car, I paid for half. With money you were supposed to give her anyway. That was her graduation gift you promised 2 years ago. I'd forgotten about that promise. Technically, yes, I'd said I'd match whatever she saved as her graduation present, but that didn't matter. She'd disobeyed me. This morning I knocked on Claire's door. She was packing. "We need to talk before you leave." Silence. "Claire, I'm still your father." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold. "No, you're just a man who thinks he owns me. I raised you. You controlled me. There's a difference. That tattoo is a star for Grandma, her nickname for me before she died. Stars shine in darkness, Claire. That's what she used to say. Ryan has one too because he held me while she died when you were too busy with work to come to the hospital. My mother. She died 6 months ago. I hadn't known the tattoo was for her. You should have told me. I tried. You said never and walked away. You didn't want to hear it. You still should have asked permission. I'm 18. I don't need your permission to honor my grandmother. While you're under my roof, I'm not anymore. I'm never coming back." She zipped her suitcase. "Claire, don't be dramatic. You'll come home for Christmas." "No, I won't. Mom already said I can stay with her. Ryan's family invited me for Thanksgiving. I don't need you anymore. I'm your father. Biologically." She grabbed her bags and walked past me. I followed her downstairs. "How are you getting to college? You don't have a car." "Ryan's driving me. His parents bought me a bus pass for when I need it." "I can drive you." "No." She opened the front door. Ryan was waiting outside with his truck. "Claire, if you leave like this, don't expect me to pay for college." She turned around. "You're not paying. Remember the commercial money? The college fund I earned myself? It's in my name. Has been since I turned 18. Mom made sure of that in the divorce. I'd forgotten about that too. What about spending money? Books? Food? I got a job on campus, and Ryan's parents set up an emergency fund for me. They said anyone who sells their child's car for getting a tattoo can't be trusted to support them. Ryan's parents. They'd always been too permissive. Now they were enabling her rebellion. This is because of them, isn't it? They're turning you against me. Claire laughed. Actually laughed. No, Dad. This is because of you. You showed me who you really are. Someone who values control over love. Obedience over understanding. She walked to Ryan's truck. Claire! You get back here right now! She got in without looking back. As they drove away, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Her suitcase. The one I'd bought her for graduation. It had a luggage tag I hadn't seen before. I'd caught a glimpse as she loaded it. The address wasn't her college dorm. It was a law firm. Henderson and Associates. My phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Sullivan, this is Catherine Henderson. I'm representing your daughter Claire in a civil suit. We need to discuss the $8,000 you took from her without authorization. I gave it back. After using it as leverage to steal her vehicle, which was registered in her name. The dealership confirmed they processed the return fraudulently. You forged her signature. We have the paperwork. I hung up, hands shaking. Claire's door was still open. On her desk was an envelope with my name. Inside were photos, screenshots, 3 years of text messages where I'd threatened to take things away if she didn't obey. Documentation of every controlling behavior. A recording. When had she recorded this? Of me saying I owned her because I raised her. At the bottom, a note in her handwriting. Mom's lawyer said this is enough for emancipation retroactively. Which means the car sale was theft. Ryan's dad is a police officer. He's been documenting everything for months. Check your doorstep. I ran to the door. A police cruiser was pulling up. I watched through the front window as the officer climbed out of his cruiser, straightening his uniform before pulling a folder from the passenger seat. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The doorbell rang, sharp and official, cutting through the silent house. I stood frozen in the entryway, staring at the door like it might disappear if I didn't move. The bell rang again, longer this time, and I knew avoiding this would only make things worse. I opened the door to find Officer Zachary Powers on my doorstep, his expression neutral, but his eyes scanning me like he was already forming an assessment. He held the folder against his chest with one hand. Mr. Sullivan? He asked, though clearly he already knew. Yes, I managed. I'm Officer Powers. I need to speak with you about a complaint we've received regarding vehicle theft and fraudulent documentation. May I come in? My throat felt tight. Am I being arrested? No, sir. Not at this time. I'm here to gather your statement and provide you with some information about next steps. I stepped aside and let him in, watching as he moved into my living room with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. He gestured to the couch and I sat, feeling like a stranger in my own house. He remained standing, opening the folder to reveal paperwork I couldn't read from this distance. I understand you recently sold a vehicle registered to your daughter, Claire Sullivan. Is that correct? I paid for half of it, I said immediately. More than half, actually. I matched her savings and bought the car myself from the dealership. It was mine to take back. Officer Powers nodded slowly, making a note on his paperwork. The registration shows the vehicle was titled solely in Claire Sullivan's name. Were you aware of that? Well, yes, but I'm her father. I bought it for her. That doesn't mean she could just do whatever she wanted and keep it. Sir, the vehicle was registered in her name. That makes her the legal owner, regardless of who paid for it. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Did you sign any documentation when you returned the vehicle to the dealership? My stomach dropped. I signed the return paperwork, yes. And what name did you sign? I looked away. I may have signed Claire's name. But I had the right to do that. I'm her father, and I paid for the car. Officer Powers made another note, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. Mr. Sullivan, signing someone else's name to a legal document without their permission is fraud, regardless of your relationship to them. The dealership has confirmed this occurred. This is ridiculous. Claire got a tattoo after I specifically told her not to. She disobeyed me, so I took back the car as punishment. That's called parenting. She's 18 years old, sir. She's legally an adult. Officer Powers closed the folder and looked at me directly. I need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. I strongly suggest you bring legal representation. He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. You'll also need to contact this attorney. Catherine Henderson. She's representing your daughter in a civil suit and there's a court date already scheduled. I took the card with numb fingers, staring at Catherine's name printed in neat black letters. A court date? Yes, sir. You'll receive official notification in the next few days. Officer Powers moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Sullivan, I'd recommend you take this seriously. Document fraud is a criminal offense and the evidence against you is substantial. He left, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded final. I stood in my empty living room holding Catherine's business card, my daughter's lawsuit suddenly feeling very real. The house was too quiet. I grabbed my phone and called my brother, my hand still shaking as I pressed his contact. He answered on the third ring. Hey, what's up? I need help. Claire's suing me and the police just left my house. There was a long pause. What did you do? I took back the car I bought her. She got a tattoo after I told her not to, so I sold the car as punishment. Now she's claiming I stole it and forged her signature on the return paperwork. Did you forge her signature? I signed her name, but I had the right to. I paid for the car. My brother let out a long breath. You need a lawyer. Right now, before you talk to the police again. Don't say anything else to anyone until you have legal representation. It's not that serious. I was just teaching her responsibility. She's 18. She's an adult. And if you forge documents, that's fraud. This is serious. He paused. Call Colin Hensley. He handles civil disputes and he's good. I'll text you his number. Fine, I'll call him. Do it now, and don't talk to the police without him present. Promise me. I promise. I hung up and stared at my phone until my brother's text came through with Colin's contact information. I called and left a message requesting an emergency consultation, emphasizing the word emergency maybe too many times. His assistant called back within 20 minutes and scheduled me for 8 the next morning. I spent the rest of the evening on my laptop, searching for legal cases about parents repossessing gifts from their children. Every case I found went badly for the parents. Courts consistently ruled that gifts were gifts, regardless of who paid or what conditions the giver claimed existed. I kept searching anyway, desperate to find something that would prove I was right. The consultation with Colin started badly and got worse. His office was small but professional, with law books lining the walls and diplomas I didn't bother reading. Colin himself was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that made me uncomfortable from the moment I sat down. Tell me exactly what happened, he said, pulling out a legal pad. I explained everything, from Claire's tattoo to the car sale to the forged signature. Colin took notes without interrupting, his expression getting more serious with each detail. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to be blunt. You have almost no legal standing here. But I paid for half the car, more than half. The car was registered solely in Claire's name. That makes her the legal owner. Your financial contribution doesn't change that legal fact. He flipped through his notes. You mentioned promising to match her savings as a graduation gift. Is that accurate? Yes, but that was before she got the tattoo. Did you tell her the gift was conditional on her behavior? I hesitated. Not explicitly, but she should have known. Colin shook his head. That creates a verbal contract. You promised money as a graduation gift, she accepted that promise and relied on it. You can't retroactively add conditions she didn't agree to. He tapped his pen against the pad. And the forged signature is the bigger problem. That's criminal fraud. If the prosecutor decides to file charges, you could be facing serious consequences beyond the civil suit. I thought I had the right to sign for her. She's my daughter. She's an adult. You don't have the right to sign legal documents in her name, regardless of your relationship. Colin leaned back in his chair. My consultation fee is $400. If you want me to represent you, I'll need a $5,000 retainer immediately. But I need to be clear with you, this case is going to be difficult. Your best option might be to settle quickly before criminal charges are filed. I pulled out my checkbook, my hand cramping as I wrote the $400 amount. I want you to represent me. I'll get you the retainer today. Then start gathering any documentation that might support your case. Emails, text messages, anything showing you intended the car as a conditional gift. Though I have to warn you, that defense is weak given the registration situation and the verbal contract issue. I left Colin's office and drove straight to my bank, withdrawing $5,000 from my savings account. Watching my emergency fund drop by that amount made my chest tight, but I didn't have a choice. I delivered the check to Colin's office that afternoon and spent the rest of the day searching through my emails and text messages like he'd instructed. Every message I found made things worse. I'd explicitly told Claire the money was her graduation gift. No conditions, no requirements, no mention of behavior or obedience. I'd promised her $8,000 to match her savings and I'd given it to her. Then I'd taken it back when she did something I didn't like. Looking at the evidence objectively, I could see how bad it looked. But she disobeyed me. That had to count for something. The next morning, Colin met me at the police station, briefing me in the parking lot before we went inside. He told me to answer questions directly, but not to volunteer extra information, and to let him interrupt if he thought I was saying something dangerous. Officer Powers and his partner, a woman whose name I didn't catch, led us to an interview room that smelled like stale coffee and cleaning products. They asked detailed questions about the car purchase, making me walk through every step from finding the dealership to signing the paperwork. They focused heavily on the registration process, asking multiple times if I'd understood that the car was titled in Claire's name only. I understood, I admitted, but I was buying it for her. I didn't think it mattered whose name was on the title. And when you returned the car to the dealership, what paperwork did you sign? I glanced at Colin, who nodded slightly. I signed a return authorization form. In whose name? Claire's name. Why did you sign her name instead of your own? Because the car was registered to her. I thought I needed to sign as her. The officers exchanged a look I couldn't read. Officer Powers made a note on his paperwork. Did Claire give you permission to sign her name? No, but I'm her father. I paid for the car. I thought I had the right. Did you tell the dealership you were Claire Sullivan? I felt sweat forming on my back. I may have. I don't remember exactly. The dealership manager says you presented yourself as Claire and signed her name to the return documents. Is that accurate? Colin put his hand on my arm. My client has answered that question. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, circling back to the signature issue repeatedly. By the time they let us leave, I felt sick. Colin pulled me aside in the parking lot, his expression grim. The signature issue is serious. The dealership manager, Nicholas Barnes, has already provided a sworn statement that you presented yourself as Claire and signed her name. That's identity fraud on top of document fraud. What does that mean? It means you need to seriously consider settling Claire's civil suit immediately. If you settle and make restitution, the prosecutor might decline to file criminal charges. If you fight this and lose, which you almost certainly will, you're looking at criminal prosecution on top of the civil judgment. No, Claire's being manipulated by Ryan's family. Once she's away at college and away from their influence, she'll realize this whole thing is ridiculous and drop it. Colin stared at me for a long moment. That's not going to happen. And even if it did, the prosecutor can file charges regardless of whether Claire wants to pursue the civil case. You forged documents. That's a crime whether your daughter forgives you or not. I'll take my chances. He shook his head. It's your decision. But I'm advising you strongly to reconsider. I drove home and spent 3 days in a fog of anxiety and anger, jumping every time my phone rang. On the 4th day, a courier delivered a thick envelope from Catherine's law firm. Inside was the official lawsuit, and seeing it in formal legal language made everything feel horrifyingly real. Catherine was seeking $16,000 in damages, 8 for the car's value and 8 for Claire's original savings, plus additional compensation for emotional distress. The exhibits attached to the lawsuit destroyed me. Photos of Claire crying as the tow truck took her car, her face red and desperate. Text messages I'd sent over the past 3 years, threatening to take away her phone, her computer, her college fund if she didn't obey me. A timeline documenting every controlling behavior, every punishment, every threat. Reading through the evidence felt like looking at myself through a stranger's eyes, and I didn't recognize the pattern they were describing. I saw a father teaching responsibility. They saw abuse. I tried calling Claire's mother, desperate to make her understand this was all a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. She didn't answer. I called 3 more times before she finally sent a text that made my hands shake. You've controlled Claire her whole life and now you're facing consequences. Don't contact me or Claire again. All communication goes through Catherine Henderson. I stared at that message for an hour, reading it over and over. I was completely cut off from my daughter with no way to explain my side or make her understand I'd only been trying to teach her responsibility. Work became a nightmare. My boss called me into his office 2 days after I received the lawsuit, closing the door with a deliberate care that told me this wouldn't be good. He'd heard about the legal situation through neighborhood gossip, he explained, and while he wasn't taking disciplinary action now, he needed me to understand that any criminal charges would require my immediate resignation. I assured him everything would be resolved quickly, that this was just a misunderstanding between me and my daughter that had been blown out of proportion. But I could see doubt in his eyes, could feel my professional reputation crumbling with every word I spoke. He let me return to work, but the damage was done. Colleagues who used to chat with me in the break room found reasons to leave when I entered. My project team started excluding me from informal planning sessions. I'd become toxic, someone to avoid, and I didn't know how to fix it. I spent the weekend digging through old emails and text messages, looking for anything that might help my case. Colin said we needed evidence that the car was meant as a conditional gift, something tied to Claire's behavior or respect. But every message I found made things worse. 2 years ago, I'd texted Claire a photo of the Mazda with the words, "Your graduation present when you finish senior year. So proud of you." No conditions mentioned, no requirements about obedience, just a promise. I printed the conversation anyway and brought it to Colin's office Monday morning. He read through everything slowly, his expression getting more serious with each page. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me across his desk. "This actually hurts us. You explicitly called it a graduation present with no strings attached." I tried to explain that Claire understood the implicit expectations, that she knew gifts came with the requirement of respect and proper behavior. Colin shook his head and said we'd file our response anyway, arguing that Claire violated the spirit of the gift by deliberately defying my wishes about the tattoo. He warned me the argument was weak, but it was all we had. The response got filed Wednesday morning. I felt some relief having our side officially on record, explaining how Claire's actions justified taking back the car. Colin included my text messages showing years of providing for Claire, being involved in her life, setting reasonable boundaries. He argued that the car was part of a parent-child relationship built on mutual respect, and Claire had broken that foundation. I thought maybe the judge would understand that parents have the right to enforce consequences when children act disrespectfully. That relief lasted exactly 4 hours. Catherine filed a motion to dismiss our entire defense before lunch. Colin called me at work to explain what she'd done. She was arguing that verbal contracts for graduation gifts can't include undefined obedience conditions that violate an adult's autonomy. She cited 3 different cases where courts ruled against parents who tried to control adult children through conditional gifts. The legal terms were confusing, but Colin's frustration was clear. She's right. The law doesn't recognize parental authority to control adult children's personal choices, even if money is involved. The judge scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks out to consider the motion. 3 weeks of waiting to find out if our defense would even be allowed at trial. I couldn't focus at work. Every meeting felt pointless when my entire relationship with Claire was decided in legal filings I barely understood. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I looked at Claire's social media. She'd blocked me on everything after she left, but I created a fake account using my middle name and a random profile photo. It took me 20 minutes to find her because I didn't know her exact username, but eventually I located her college's tagged photos, and there she was. The first photo stopped me cold. Claire was standing outside a brick building with 2 other girls, all 3 of them laughing at something off camera. She looked happy. Actually happy, not the careful, pleasant expression she'd worn at home. Her shoulders were relaxed, her smile was real, and she had her arm around one of the girls like they'd been friends for years. The caption said, "First week of class is complete. Love my roommates already." I scrolled through more photos. Claire at a club fair, signing up for the psychology club and the campus volunteer organization. Claire in the library with textbooks spread across a table, looking focused and engaged. Claire at some kind of outdoor concert with Ryan, both of them casual and comfortable. Every single photo showed her looking more alive than I'd seen her in years. The campus events, the studying, the new friends. She was living exactly the college experience I'd wanted for her, the successful academic and social life I'd always pushed her toward. Except I wasn't in it. Not in a single photo, not mentioned in any caption, completely erased from this new chapter of her life. I read through the comments on her posts. Friends saying, "You look so happy," and "College suits you." Ryan's mother Isabella commenting, "So proud of you, sweetheart," with heart emojis. Claire's responses were warm and grateful, thanking people for their support. She'd built this whole support system that didn't include me at all. One post from 2 days ago showed Claire at a campus coffee shop with a group of students. The caption read, "Study group keeping me sane during syllabus week. Grateful for good people." The top comment was from someone named Harmony, asking, "Dinner at the dining hall after?" Claire had replied, "Definitely. Meet you there at 6. She had plans, friendships, a routine, a whole life that was working perfectly well without any guidance from me. I spent 2 hours going through every photo and post from the past 3 weeks. Claire had moved into her dorm, started classes, made friends, joined activities, and was clearly thriving. She looked healthier than she had at home, more confident, like some weight had lifted off her shoulders the moment she left. The realization hit me hard. She was proving that she never needed my control in the first place. Everything I'd told myself about Claire requiring my guidance and structure to succeed was wrong. She was succeeding just fine, maybe better, without me enforcing rules and monitoring her choices. All those years of carefully managing her schedule, approving her friends, directing her activities. She was doing better without any of it. I felt angry at first, betrayed, like Claire had been hiding her true capabilities just to make me look foolish. But that anger faded into something worse, a sick feeling in my stomach as I realized what this meant. If Claire could thrive without my control, then maybe my control had been the problem all along. Maybe she'd been held back by my management, not helped by it. I closed the browser and sat in the dark living room for a long time. The house felt empty. Claire's room upstairs was still exactly as she'd left it, bed made, desk cleared, no trace of her remaining. She'd taken everything that mattered to her and left behind only the furniture I'd chosen. My phone rang and my mother's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer because I wasn't ready to hear her opinion about the lawsuit, but avoiding her would only make things worse, so I picked up. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Claire called me. She told me what you did." Her voice was cold in a way I'd rarely heard. I started to explain about the tattoo and the disrespect, but she cut me off. "You sold her car because she got a tattoo honoring your mother." "Honoring me." The emphasis on those last two words made me flinch. I tried to explain that I hadn't known what the tattoo was for, that Claire never told me it was a memorial. My mother's laugh was bitter. "She tried to tell you. You said never and walked away. She told me about that conversation. You didn't want to hear it because you'd already decided the answer." I defended myself, saying Claire should have been more clear, should have explained the significance before getting the tattoo. My mother's response was brutal. "You've become exactly like your father." The comparison stunned me into silence. My father had been controlling and manipulative, using money and gifts as weapons to force compliance. I'd spent my whole adult life trying to be different from him, to be a better parent than he'd been. "I'm nothing like Dad," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to myself. My mother started listing incidents from my childhood that I'd forgotten or blocked out. The time my father bought me a car for my 16th birthday, then took it away 2 months later because I stayed out past curfew with friends. The college fund he'd promised me, then withheld when I chose a major he didn't approve of. The apartment deposit he'd offered to pay, then refused because he didn't like my girlfriend. Every gift had come with invisible strings, conditions I didn't know about until I violated them. "He controlled you with money and gifts for years," my mother said. "You resented him for it. You told me you'd never do that to your own children. And now look at what you did to Claire." I wanted to argue that it was different, that I was teaching Claire responsibility while my father had just been petty and controlling. But the words wouldn't come because I could hear how similar it sounded. My father had used the same justifications, claiming he was teaching me respect and consequences. "Claire is suing me," I said, trying to make my mother understand the seriousness of the situation. "She got lawyers involved instead of just talking to me." My mother's response was immediate. "Good. I'm glad she's holding you accountable. I should have done the same thing to your father years ago instead of just leaving." She paused, then continued more quietly. "I gave Claire my blessing for that tattoo. We talked about it before I died, about her getting a star to remember me by. She wanted my permission, and I gave it gladly. So when you punished her for honoring my memory, you didn't just hurt Claire. You disrespected my wishes, too." The call ended shortly after that. My mother said she needed to go, that she was too angry to keep talking. I sat holding the phone, her words replaying in my mind. I remembered how much I'd resented my father's controlling behavior, how trapped and angry I'd felt under his rules. I'd promised myself I'd never make my own children feel that way. But Claire's journals, her lawsuit, her complete cutting of contact, all suggested I'd done exactly what I swore I wouldn't do. The preliminary hearing arrived 3 weeks later. I put on my best suit and met Colin at the courthouse downtown. The building was old and imposing, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. We went through security and found the right courtroom on the 3rd floor. Claire was already there with Catherine, sitting at the plaintiff's table. She wore a professional dress I'd never seen before, and her hair was pulled back neatly. She looked older somehow, more composed. She didn't look at me when I entered. Catherine had folders and documents spread across the table, everything organized and labeled. Colin and I sat at the defense table with our much smaller stack of papers. The judge entered and we all stood. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She told us to sit and asked Catherine to present Claire's motion to dismiss our conditional gift defense. Catherine stood and addressed the judge with complete confidence. She explained that our defense relied on the claim that the car was a conditional gift contingent on Claire's obedience and respect. Then she systematically destroyed that argument. First, she showed the judge the car's registration documents, highlighting that Claire's name was the only one listed as owner. The title was entirely in Claire's name, transferred to her on her 18th birthday. Legally, the car belonged to Claire alone, regardless of who paid for it. Then Catherine presented the dealership records showing that I'd signed Claire's name on the return paperwork without her authorization. The dealership manager had provided a sworn statement saying I'd presented myself as acting on Claire's behalf and had forged her signature on multiple documents. Catherine called it fraud and theft, not a parent reclaiming a conditional gift. Finally, Catherine showed the judge my text messages from 2 years ago, where I'd explicitly promised to match Claire's savings as her graduation present. She read my exact words aloud in the courtroom. Your graduation present when you finish senior year. So proud of you. No conditions mentioned, no requirements stated, just an unconditional promise. Catherine argued that verbal contracts for graduation gifts cannot include undefined obedience conditions that violate an adult's autonomy, especially when those conditions weren't disclosed at the time of the promise. She cited 3 cases where courts had ruled against parents trying to control adult children through conditional gifts after the fact. The judge listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Catherine finished, she asked Colin to respond. Colin did his best, arguing that the context of a parent-child relationship implied certain behavioral expectations, even if they weren't explicitly stated. He claimed Claire knew that accepting gifts from me came with the requirement of maintaining respect and following household rules. But even as he spoke, I could tell the argument sounded weak. The judge interrupted him twice to ask specific questions about what conditions I'd communicated to Claire at the time of the promise. Colin had to admit that no specific conditions had been stated, just general parental expectations. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. When both sides had finished presenting, the judge took off her glasses and looked directly at me. Mr. Sullivan, did you tell your daughter at the time you promised this graduation gift that it was conditional on her behavior or choices? I hesitated, then admitted I hadn't spelled out specific conditions. The judge nodded slowly. And the car was registered solely in her name? I confirmed it was. And you signed her name to dealership documents without her knowledge or permission? I tried to explain that I thought I had the right as her father, but the judge cut me off. She said she'd review the legal precedents and issue a ruling within a week, but her tone made it clear which way she was leaning. She denied our motion to dismiss and set a trial date for 2 months out. Then she looked at both lawyers and suggested strongly that we should consider settlement, saying she saw significant liability issues on the defense side. The hearing ended, and everyone stood as the judge left. Catherine gathered her materials efficiently, while Claire sat quietly beside her. Colin touched my arm and indicated we should leave quickly. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Colin pulled me aside to a quiet corner. His expression was serious as he explained that the hearing had gone badly for us. The judge clearly didn't buy our conditional gift argument, and the forged signature issue was a major problem. We're going to lose at trial, he said bluntly. And the forged signature means the prosecutor might file criminal charges any day now. He recommended offering to pay the full $16,000 immediately, plus Claire's legal fees to avoid criminal prosecution. The total would be around $24,000 with legal costs. I balked at the amount, saying I'd already returned Claire's $8,000, and that should be enough. Colin shook his head and explained that wasn't how it worked. Claire was entitled to the car's full value because I'd sold it without authorization. The $8,000 I'd returned was separate from the car's worth. Plus, Claire had incurred legal fees defending her property rights. I refused to agree to any settlement, still convinced Claire would realize she was manipulated and drop the lawsuit once the semester got harder. I told Colin that Claire was probably struggling with her classes by now and would see that Ryan's family was using her against me. Colin looked at me with something like pity and said we'd continue preparing for trial, but he warned me again that we had almost no chance of winning. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Claire in that courtroom, composed and professional, not looking at me even once. I thought about the judge's skeptical questions and Catherine's organized presentation. I thought about my mother's words comparing me to my father. Finally, around 2 a.m, I got up and went to Claire's room. I hadn't been in there since she left. I turned on the light and looked around at the space that used to be hers. The walls still had marks where her posters had hung. The bookshelf was empty except for a few books she hadn't wanted. Her desk was clear, the drawers emptied of all personal items. I opened her closet and found only clothes she'd outgrown or didn't like, things not worth taking to college. In the back of the closet, I found a box of photos from when Claire was younger. I pulled it out and sat on her bed, going through pictures I hadn't looked at in years. Claire at age 5 in her first dance recital, beaming at the camera. Claire at 8, holding up a spelling bee trophy. Claire at 10, serious and focused at her piano recital. Claire at 13, smiling politely at a family dinner. I looked at these photos and tried to remember Claire at each age. What I remembered most was how well-behaved she'd been, how she never talked back or caused problems, how she did everything I asked without complaint. Other parents would comment on how lucky I was to have such an obedient daughter. I'd felt proud of that, proud that my parenting had produced such a perfect child. But looking at these photos now, I noticed something I'd missed before. Claire's smile in the earlier photos was genuine and bright, but somewhere around age 12 or 13, it changed. The smiles became more careful, more controlled. Her body language shifted from relaxed to cautious. By 15 and 16, she looked tense even in happy family photos. For the first time, I wondered if that perfection had been healthy or if I'd already been controlling her back then. I'd mistaken her compliance for genuine happiness, her obedience for contentment. Maybe that perfect behavior hadn't been because she was thriving under my guidance. Maybe it was because she'd learned that any deviation from my expectations would result in consequences. Maybe I'd trained her to hide her real self and perform the daughter I wanted to see. I put the photos back in the box and left her room, turning off the light behind me. The house felt emptier than ever. I picked up another journal, this one from when Claire was 14. The handwriting was neater than the earlier ones, more controlled. I flipped through pages of homework notes and doodles until I found an entry dated March 15th. Saw the soccer tryout flyers today. Megan asked if I was going to try out. I wanted to say yes so badly. I used to love playing in elementary school, but Dad would say it interferes with my study schedule. He'd say, so I told Megan I wasn't interested. She looked disappointed. I'm disappointed too, but it's easier not to ask than to hear him say no. I read it twice. Claire had wanted to play soccer. I didn't even know that. She never mentioned it. She never asked, because she already knew what I'd say. The next journal was from when she was 15. I found an entry from October. Sarah invited me to her birthday party this weekend. It's at a bowling alley and sounds really fun. But Dad made comments last month about Sarah's family being bad influences because her older brother got a tattoo. If I ask to go, he'll either say no or make me feel guilty for wanting to spend time with people he doesn't approve of. So I'm going to tell Sarah I have too much homework. She'll understand. Everyone always understands when I can't do things. I set the journal down and stared at the wall. Claire had been filtering her own life through my opinions before even speaking to me. She'd learned to predict my reactions and avoid anything that might displease me. She'd trained herself to want only what I'd approve of. I grabbed another journal from age 16. Got asked to prom today by this guy Derek from my English class. He's nice and smart, and Dad would probably approve because his parents are both doctors. But I said no because I don't want to date anyone Dad picks out for me. Ryan asked me out last week. Dad won't like him because his family is too permissive, but that's exactly why I like them. They let Ryan make his own choices. They trust him. I'm going to say yes to Ryan and just not tell Dad until I have to. Maybe if we're already dating, he'll have to accept it. So Claire had chosen Ryan specifically because his family was different from me. She'd picked him as an act of rebellion, or maybe as an act of survival. The journals kept going. Page after page of Claire censoring herself, hiding her interests, avoiding friendships I might criticize. She'd created an entire internal life I knew nothing about because she was afraid to show me any part of herself that didn't match my expectations. I thought I was raising a perfect daughter. Really, I'd been raising a daughter who was perfect at hiding. I brought the journals to my meeting with Colin the next day. His office smelled like coffee and old books. I set the stack on his desk. Claire's mother sent these. They're Claire's journals from when she was 12 to 17. I was thinking maybe they could help our case somehow. Show that I wasn't trying to control her, just parent her well. That she understood I had her best interests in mind. Colin picked up the top journal and flipped through it. He read silently for several minutes. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. He set that journal down and picked up another. More reading, more silence. Finally, he looked up at me. These journals would destroy us in court. Completely destroy us. I blinked. What do you mean? They show Claire was a normal teenager dealing with normal parent stuff. They show 3 years of documented psychological control. A pattern of behavior where your daughter censored her own thoughts and desires before even expressing them because she'd learned that any deviation from your expectations would result in disapproval. This is evidence of long-term emotional manipulation. The car incident isn't an isolated event. It's one example in a much bigger pattern of control. He pushed the journals back toward me. Catherine Henderson cannot see these. Ever. If she gets her hands on this evidence, we won't just lose the civil case. You could be looking at additional claims for emotional abuse. The prosecutor might get interested again. But I didn't mean to make her feel that way. I was trying to guide her. Your intentions don't matter. The impact does. And these journals document the impact clearly. Claire was afraid of you. Not physically afraid, but afraid of your judgment, your disapproval, your control. She learned to hide herself completely. I stared at the journals. So what do I do with them? Keep them somewhere safe. Don't show them to anyone. And for God's sake, settle this case immediately before Catherine starts digging deeper into Claire's childhood. If she interviews Claire's friends, teachers, anyone who knew her growing up, she'll find this same pattern. These journals are just the written proof of what everyone around Claire probably already noticed. He leaned forward. I'm telling you as your lawyer and as someone who wants to help you. Settle now. Pay whatever Claire wants. Accept her terms. Because if this goes to trial and these patterns come out, you'll lose everything. Your case, your money, possibly your job if the emotional abuse angle gets traction. Against Colin's advice, I tried to write Claire a letter that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and a pen. I wanted to explain myself, make her understand that I'd been trying to protect her, guide her toward success, give her the tools she needed for a good life. I started writing. Dear Claire, I know you're angry with me about the car, but I need you to understand that everything I did was because I love you and want the best for you. When I set rules and expectations, it was to help you become successful and responsible. I stopped, read it back. It sounded defensive, like I was justifying everything. I crumpled the paper and started again. Dear Claire, I'm sorry that you felt controlled. That wasn't my intention. I was trying to be a good father and teach you important values. Sometimes parents have to make tough decisions that their children don't understand until they're older. Worse. That was even worse. I was still explaining, still defending, still making it about my perspective. I tried a third draft, a fourth, a fifth. Each one came out wrong. Each one was full of but and however, and you need to understand. I couldn't write a simple apology without turning it into a justification. By the seventh draft, I gave up. I looked at all the crumpled papers on my table and realized the problem. I was still trying to make Claire see things my way. Still trying to control her understanding of what happened. Even in an apology, I was trying to manage her reaction, shape her response, direct her feelings. I couldn't just acknowledge her pain. I had to explain it, contextualize it, minimize it. The letter I needed to write was simple. I'm sorry I controlled you. I'm sorry I made you afraid to be yourself. I'm sorry I took your car. I was wrong. But I couldn't write those words, because some part of me still didn't believe I was completely wrong. Some part of me still thought I'd been doing the right thing, just maybe too strictly. I threw all the drafts in the trash and went to bed without writing anything. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that the court had ordered us to attempt mediation before trial. The mediation was scheduled for the following Thursday at a neutral office downtown. I'd have to sit in a room with Claire for the first time since she left. Colin called to prepare me. Morgan Tyson is the mediator. She's fair but firm. Her job is to help us reach a settlement without going to trial. She'll want to hear from both sides. Let me do most of the talking. If she asks you direct questions, keep your answers short and focused on resolution, not justification. Thursday arrived. I drove to the mediation office in a building I'd never been to before. Colin met me in the lobby. We took the elevator to the third floor and walked into a conference room with a long table and uncomfortable chairs. Claire was already there with Catherine. I saw her and stopped in the doorway. She looked different. Her shoulders were back, not hunched forward the way they used to be at home. She sat up straight in her chair. When she saw me, she didn't look away or down like she used to. She met my eyes directly. Her expression was neutral, not angry or sad. Just calm and distant. She looked like a stranger. Morgan entered right behind us. She was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and glasses. She shook everyone's hands and sat at the head of the table. Thank you all for coming. Mediation is an opportunity to resolve this dispute without the time and expense of a trial. I'm here to facilitate conversation, not to judge who's right or wrong. Claire, I'd like to start by hearing from you. Can you explain how the car incident affected you? Claire nodded. Her voice was steady. When my father took my car, it confirmed everything I'd been feeling for years. That he saw me as property he could control rather than a person with my own rights. The car was registered in my name. I'd saved half the money myself. It was mine legally and morally, but he took it anyway because I'd made a choice about my own body that he didn't approve of. The tattoo was for my grandmother, who died 6 months ago. She was the only adult in my life who loved me without conditions. My father didn't even ask why I got the tattoo. He just punished me. That told me everything I needed to know about our relationship. It wasn't about love or guidance. It was about obedience. Morgan turned to me. Mr. Sullivan, would you like to respond? I opened my mouth to explain my reasoning, to talk about teaching responsibility and consequences. But Morgan held up her hand. Before you do, let me ask you something. Can you acknowledge Claire's feelings without defending your actions? I hesitated. I can explain why I made the choices I made. That's not what I asked. Can you simply acknowledge how Claire felt without justifying what you did? I tried. I'm sorry you felt controlled. Claire's expression hardened. Morgan shook her head slightly. Try again. Without the word felt. I'm sorry that the car situation made you feel like I didn't respect your autonomy. Still using feeling language. You're apologizing for her emotions, not for your actions. I was getting frustrated. I'm sorry I took the car in a way that upset you. You're still focused on her reaction rather than your behavior. Colin touched my arm, trying to get me to stop, but I kept going. I'm sorry the way I handled things made you think I was trying to control you. Claire stood up. This is pointless. He can't even apologize without making it about how I interpreted his actions rather than what he actually did. Morgan looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, do you understand what Claire is asking for? I'm trying to apologize the way she wants me to. No, you're trying to apologize without taking full responsibility. Claire wants to hear you acknowledge what you did, not how she responded to it. Can you say I'm sorry I controlled you without any qualifiers? The words stuck in my throat, because saying them felt like admitting I'd been a bad father, like everything I'd done for 18 years was wrong. I was trying to parent her. That's not an apology. That's a justification. Claire sat back down. See? This is why I don't want a relationship with him. He can't admit he was wrong. He can't take responsibility. Everything is always about his intentions, his perspective, his version of events. My feelings don't matter. My experience doesn't matter. Only his interpretation of what happened matters. I wanted to argue, to explain that I did care about her feelings. But I realized she was right. Every attempt at apology had been about managing how she viewed my actions, not actually acknowledging the actions themselves. Morgan gave us a 10-minute break. When we came back, she asked Claire what she wanted from this mediation. Claire looked directly at me. I don't want a relationship with you anymore. This lawsuit isn't about money. It's about making sure you understand I'm serious about boundaries. I'll drop the entire lawsuit if you agree to 3 things. Pay me the car's full value plus my legal fees. Complete a year of therapy specifically for control issues, and have no contact with me unless I initiate it. Morgan turned to me. Mr. Sullivan, are you willing to accept these terms? I looked at Colin. He nodded slightly, encouraging me to agree. But I couldn't. I can agree to the money and the therapy, but I can't agree to never contacting my own daughter. What if there's an emergency? What if I need to reach you? Claire's voice was flat. Then you contact my mother and she'll contact me. You don't get direct access to me anymore. That's not reasonable. I'm your father. You're the man who raised me. That doesn't give you lifetime rights to access me whenever you want. What about monthly calls, just to check in? No? Every few months? No contact unless I initiate it. That's the condition. I looked at Morgan. Can we negotiate something in between? Maybe I can send emails she doesn't have to respond to? Catherine spoke up. This is exactly the problem. Claire sets a clear boundary, and your immediate response is to negotiate it, minimize it, find a way around it. You're trying to control the terms of her having autonomy from your control. Morgan looked at me. Mr. Sullivan, this is a reasonable request. Claire is an adult. She's allowed to decide who has access to her. The question is whether you can respect that decision. I couldn't answer. The idea of never being able to call Claire, never being able to reach out, never being able to check on her felt impossible. I need time to think about it. Claire stood up. Then we're done here. I'll see you at trial. She walked out. Catherine followed her. Morgan looked at me and Colin. Mediation has failed. You're scheduled for trial in 6 weeks. I strongly suggest you reconsider Claire's offer before then. Colin drove me back to my office. In the parking lot, he turned to me. You just made a catastrophic mistake. Claire offered you a way out and you couldn't take it because you can't let go of control. She's asking me to never contact my daughter. She's asking you to respect her boundaries. There's a difference, and your inability to see that difference is exactly why we're going to lose at trial. Maybe the judge will see my side. The judge will see a father who can't apologize without justifying himself, who negotiates his daughter's boundaries instead of respecting them, who still, even now, thinks he has the right to access her whenever he wants. Colin pulled out his phone. I got a call this morning. Raymond Goodman, Ryan's father, contacted me. He's willing to testify. About what? About everything. He's a police officer. He's been documenting your behavior for months. He has recordings of you yelling at Claire that you owned her because you raised her. He's prepared to discuss Claire's emotional state over the past year. Panic attacks before coming home from visits. Fear that you'd sabotage her college plans. He's been building a case like you were a suspect. I felt sick. Ryan's family has been treating me like a criminal? Because from their perspective, you were emotionally abusing their son's girlfriend. Raymond's testimony as a law enforcement officer will be devastating. He knows how to present evidence. He knows how to be credible on the stand. and he has documentation that will make you look like a controlling monster. I'm not a monster. Then why can't you respect Claire's request for no contact? Why do you need to negotiate it? I didn't have an answer. That night, I finally called a therapist. Not because I thought I needed it, but because both the prosecutor and Claire had made it a condition. I found someone named Brandon who specialized in family issues and control problems. His first available appointment was in 3 days. When I showed up, his office was small and comfortable. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with a calm manner. We sat in chairs facing each other. Tell me why you're here. The court and my daughter both want me to do therapy. There's a lawsuit. It's complicated. Okay, can you tell me about your relationship with your daughter without explaining why you made the decisions you made? That was almost exactly what Morgan had asked in mediation. I don't understand the question. Describe your interactions with Claire. What happened between you? But don't justify your actions or explain your reasoning. Just tell me what actually happened. I tried. I talked about the rules I'd set, the expectations I'd had, the car situation. But every sentence wanted to include because, or in order to, or so that she would. Every description wanted to become a justification. Brandon stopped me after 10 minutes. You're doing it again. You're explaining why you did things instead of just describing what you did. How am I supposed to talk about it without context? The context is your interpretation. I want to hear the facts first. What did you do? What did Claire do? What happened? I realized I didn't know how to talk about my relationship with Claire without defending it. Every memory was wrapped up in my reasons, my intentions, my goals. I couldn't separate what I'd done from why I'd thought it was right. Brandon gave me homework at the end of the session. Write down every rule you had for Claire. Then mark whether each rule was about her safety, your convenience, or your need for control. Be honest. Don't write what you think the rule should be categorized as. Write what it actually was. I went home and started the list. No tattoos, no piercings, no unnatural hair colors. Curfew at 9 p.m. on the school nights, 10 p.m. on weekends. No sleepovers unless I'd met the parents and approved. No social media without me having the passwords. No dating until 16 and only people I approved of. Required activities, piano, academic clubs, volunteer work I selected. Prohibited activities, soccer, drama club, anything that interfered with study time. Mandatory study hours every night, even if homework was done. No phone in bedroom at night. No closed bedroom door when friends visited. All purchases over $20 required my approval. College major had to be pre-approved from my list of acceptable careers. I kept writing. The list got longer. When I finished, I had 47 rules. Then I went through and marked each one. Safety, convenience, or control. No tattoos control, no piercings control, hair color control. Curfew safety, but the times were stricter than necessary, so partly control. No sleepovers without approval control. Social media passwords control. Dating restrictions control. Required activities control. Prohibited activities control. Mandatory study hours control. No phone at night, partly safety, mostly control. No closed doors control. Purchase approval control. College major control. I stared at the list. Out of 47 rules, only 3 were purely about safety. Seatbelts, no drugs, no drinking and driving. Everything else was either for my convenience or my control. Even the rules that started as safety had been enforced so strictly, they'd become about control. The curfew could have been midnight. The phone restriction could have been just during homework time. But I'd made them more extreme than necessary because I wanted to manage every aspect of Claire's life. I told myself it was good parenting. Really, it was control. And Claire had lived under this for 18 years. No wonder she'd left and never looked back. I sat in Brandon's office 3 days later, staring at my phone. He'd suggested I call my ex-wife, said it might help me understand things better. I didn't want to. She'd made it clear she was done with me. But Brandon pushed, said real change meant listening to perspectives I'd avoided. So I called. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was cold. I asked if we could talk about Claire, about what happened. She was quiet for a long moment, then said she'd give me 10 minutes. She told me things I didn't want to hear. How she'd left partly because I was starting to control her the same way I controlled Claire. How every decision had to go through me. How I questioned her parenting choices constantly. How I made her feel incompetent. She'd fought for specific custody provisions in the divorce to protect Claire from my need to manage everything. Weekly therapy requirements for Claire, limits on my disciplinary authority, a separate college fund I couldn't touch. She'd seen what I was doing and tried to build walls around Claire. She said she'd hoped I'd change after the divorce, that losing our marriage would make me reflect. Instead, I focused all my controlling behavior on Claire. Every rule I couldn't enforce on her anymore, I doubled down on Claire. She'd watched it happen during custody exchanges, seen Claire get quieter and more careful around me. She'd wanted to intervene, but the custody agreement tied her hands. Hearing this from her made something crack inside me. I told myself I was a good father, that Claire's perfection proved my parenting worked. But my ex-wife's voice was steady and certain. She said I'd been lying to myself for years. I went home and couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. I wandered into Claire's room, something I'd avoided since she left. Her desk was still cluttered with college prep materials. Her bookshelf still held childhood favorites. And on her closet shelf, I found a cardboard box I'd never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in my mother's handwriting, all addressed to Claire. I sat on Claire's bed and started reading. The letters went back years. My mother had written to Claire regularly, sending advice and encouragement. The early letters were sweet and simple, talking about school and hobbies. But as Claire got older, the letters changed. They talked about staying true to yourself, finding your own path, not letting others define who you should be. Several letters directly addressed Claire's struggles with my rules. One from when Claire was 15 talked about a friend I'd forbidden her to see. My mother wrote that good parents guide but don't control, that Claire needed to learn to make her own choices. Another letter from when Claire was 16 discussed college major selection. My mother encouraged Claire to follow her interests, not someone else's plan for her life. Then I found the letter that destroyed me, written 2 years before my mother died. Claire would have been 16. The letter said she'd noticed Claire seemed anxious and overly careful during family visits. My mother wrote that she recognized the signs because she'd seen them in me as a child. My grandfather had been controlling, demanding perfection, using punishment to enforce obedience. She said she'd tried to protect me but hadn't done enough. She didn't want Claire to grow up the same way. The letter ended with words I'll never forget. My mother wrote that I loved Claire but confused control with care, that my fear of Claire making mistakes was stopping her from becoming who she was meant to be. She told Claire not to let my fear stop her from living her own life. My own mother had seen exactly what I was doing. She'd tried to counteract it with these letters. She'd given Claire permission to resist me. I sat in Claire's room for hours, reading and rereading those letters. My mother was the one person whose opinion I'd valued above everyone else's. She'd raised me after my father left, worked 2 jobs to give me opportunities, never missed a school event. When she got sick, I'd visited every week, held her hand in the hospital, spoke at her funeral. I'd thought she was proud of how I raised Claire. But these letters proved otherwise. She'd clearly disapproved of my parenting. She'd seen me becoming like my grandfather, the man she'd divorced to protect me from, and she'd tried to give Claire what she couldn't give me. A voice telling her she didn't have to be perfect, that she could choose her own path. I remembered my mother's nickname for Claire, my little star. She'd called Claire that since she was tiny. I'd thought it was just a sweet grandmother thing. But now I understood. Stars shine in darkness. That's what my mother used to say. She was telling Claire to shine even when things were dark, to be her own light. The tattoo Claire got wasn't just memorial art. It was a symbol of the one adult in her life who'd encouraged her independence, who'd loved her without conditions, who'd told her it was okay to be herself, and I'd taken away her car for honoring that person, for honoring the woman who'd actually loved her the right way. I couldn't stay in that room anymore. I went to my office and pulled out paper, started writing. A real apology this time. No justifications about teaching responsibility, no explanations about my intentions, just acknowledgement of what I'd done. I wrote about the rules, how I'd controlled her clothing choices, her friends, her activities, how I'd made her feel like she had to be perfect to earn my approval, how I'd taken away her car not because she'd done something wrong, but because she'd made a choice I didn't like. I wrote about the tattoo, how I should have asked what it meant instead of immediately saying no, how I'd been too busy with work to come to the hospital when my mother was dying, leaving Claire to face that alone with Ryan, how the tattoo was beautiful and meaningful, and I'd punished her for honoring someone who'd loved her. I didn't make excuses, didn't ask for forgiveness, just said I was sorry and I understood why she'd left. I finished the letter at 2 a.m, read it over. It felt honest in a way nothing I'd written before had been. I found an envelope, wrote Claire's college dorm address on it. The address from the internet, not from any official source. I knew I wasn't supposed to contact her. The lawyers had been clear, but this felt important. She needed to know I finally understood. I drove to the post office at dawn and mailed it. 3 days went by. I checked my phone constantly, hoping Claire might respond. Nothing. Then Colin called. His voice was tight. Catherine had contacted him threatening a restraining order. Claire had received my letter and was furious I'd violated the no-contact agreement. Catherine said this proved I still didn't respect boundaries, that even my apology was another form of control. I tried to explain to Colin that I just wanted Claire to know I understood now. He cut me off, said that was exactly the problem. I'd decided Claire needed to hear from me on my timeline. I'd made the choice about what Claire needed without asking her. I'd forced my communication on her because I couldn't handle sitting with my own guilt. Even my apology had been about making myself feel better. I hung up and sat in my car in the office parking lot. Colin was right. I'd broken the agreement because I couldn't stand Claire being angry at me. Because I needed her to know I'd changed. Because waiting for her to reach out on her own terms felt impossible. I'd done exactly what I'd always done. Put my needs first and called it love. My next session with Brandon was hard. I told him about the letter, about Catherine's threat. He didn't look surprised. He asked me why I'd sent it. I said because Claire needed to know I understood. He asked if Claire had expressed that need. I admitted she hadn't. He asked what I'd hoped would happen when Claire read the letter. I said maybe she'd see I was trying to change. Maybe she'd respond. Maybe we could start talking again. Brandon leaned back in his chair. He said my need to apologize directly to Claire was still about my needs, my need for forgiveness, my timeline for fixing things, my discomfort with Claire's anger. He explained that real change meant respecting Claire's boundaries even when they hurt me. That included letting her decide if and when she wanted to hear from me. That real respect meant accepting Claire might stay angry for months or years or forever, that I didn't get to decide when our relationship healed. This concept felt impossible. It meant accepting I might never have a relationship with my daughter again. Brandon said that was exactly the point. I had to be willing to lose Claire completely. Had to change for its own sake, not as a strategy to win her back. Had to let her have total control over whether we ever spoke again. The idea made me feel sick. But I knew he was right. I started checking Claire's social media. I know I shouldn't have. Brandon had told me to give her space. But I couldn't help it. I needed to know she was okay. Her accounts were public. Photos from her first weeks of college. Claire at freshman orientation, smiling in a group photo. Claire in the library with textbooks spread around her. Claire at a club fair, signing up for activities. She'd made Dean's List. The college had posted a list of students with perfect grades, and Claire's name was on it. She'd joined 3 clubs. Volunteering at an animal shelter. Member of the Psychology Student Association. Part of an intramural volleyball team. Every photo showed her looking happy. Genuinely happy, not the careful smile she'd always had at home. Ryan was in many of the pictures, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. His family commented on every post, his mother saying how proud she was, his father posting encouraging words about Claire's achievements. They were filling the parental role I'd lost, doing it better than I ever had. The evidence that Claire was better off without me was right there on my screen. She was thriving, making friends, succeeding in the school, looking relaxed and confident. Everything I'd told myself she needed me for, she was doing fine without my guidance. Better than fine. She was flourishing. My belief that Claire needed my control to succeed was completely wrong. She'd needed freedom from it. 2 weeks passed. Colin called to say trial was approaching fast. He said we needed to make a final settlement offer, something Claire might actually accept. We couldn't win at trial. The evidence against me was too strong. He'd put together terms. $20,000 total payment. Completion of 1-year therapy with Brandon. Acceptance of Claire's no-contact boundary with the understanding she could reach out if she chose. No forced communication, no required visits, just money, therapy, and respect for her choice. Colin sent the offer to Catherine. Then I waited. 3 days went by. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work, just waited for Claire's response. On the 3rd day, Catherine called Colin back. Claire would accept the settlement, but she had one more condition. I had to write a letter to the dealership taking full responsibility for the forged signature. Had to admit what I'd done. Had to cooperate with any investigation they wanted to pursue. Colin explained what this meant. The dealership could press charges. The prosecutor could file criminal fraud charges. I could end up with a record. But Colin had already talked to the prosecutor. If I completed the settlement terms and therapy, they'd offer a diversion program. Community service instead of prosecution. The fraud attempt would stay on my record, but without a conviction if I finished all requirements. I agreed. What choice did I have? I sat down and wrote the letter to Nicholas at the dealership. Admitted I'd forged Claire's signature on the return paperwork. Said I'd misrepresented myself as having authority to return the vehicle. Took full responsibility and said the dealership had done nothing wrong. I mailed it certified mail so there'd be proof of delivery. Colin confirmed the prosecutor had the deal in writing. 100 hours community service, 1-year therapy, complete the settlement terms, then they dismissed the charges. I'd still have the fraud attempt on my record. Background checks would show it, but no conviction if I did everything right. The settlement hearing was scheduled for the following week. I had to liquidate most of my savings to get $20,000. Even then I was short, had to take out the personal loan I'd been approved for. Signed papers at the bank agreeing to monthly payments I could barely afford. The loan officer looked at me with something like pity. On the day of the hearing, I put on my best suit and drove to the courthouse. Claire was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with Catherine and Ryan. She didn't look at me, wouldn't even glance in my direction. We went into the courtroom. The judge reviewed the settlement terms, asked if I understood I was agreeing to pay $20,000. I said yes. Asked if I understood the no-contact provision. I said yes. Asked me to explain what the no-contact provision meant. I had to say out loud that I would not attempt to contact Claire in any way unless she initiated contact first. That I understood she had the right to decide if and when we communicated. That I would respect her boundaries completely. Claire sat across the room the whole time, her face blank, her eyes looking anywhere but at me. The judge asked if I had the payment. I handed over the check. $20,000, my savings gone, a loan I'd be paying off for years. The judge filed the paperwork, said the case was settled. We could go. Claire stood up immediately, walked out without looking back. I sat in that courtroom for 10 minutes after everyone left. The most humiliating moment of my life. Admitting in court that I had to be legally ordered to respect my daughter's boundaries. My first real therapy session with Brandon after the settlement was different. Before, I'd been going because the court required it. Now it was part of the settlement. Proof I was changing. Brandon started by asking why I needed control. What I was afraid would happen if I didn't manage everything. I tried to deflect, said I just wanted what was best for Claire. He pushed back, asked what specifically scared me about Claire making her own choices. I got defensive, said nothing scared me. He waited, just sat there looking at me until the silence became uncomfortable. Finally, I admitted I was terrified of being unnecessary, of Claire not needing me. Brandon asked what my purpose was as a father if Claire didn't need my constant guidance. I didn't have an answer. He helped me see that my controlling behavior was driven by my own fear of being worthless. That I'd built my entire identity around being Claire's father, around directing her life. If she didn't need that direction, what was I? He said that's why I couldn't let go. Because without control over Claire, I didn't know who I was. The session left me feeling hollow, but also like something important had shifted, like I was finally seeing the real problem. Brandon's homework assignment sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to start it. List moments when I felt loved as a child. Distinguish between love tied to control versus genuine connection. I stared at the blank paper and tried to remember feeling loved at all. My father showed approval when I brought home perfect grades or won academic awards. He took me to baseball games when I made honor roll. He bought me things when I obeyed without question. But loved? I couldn't picture a single moment where he just was accepted me for existing. Every positive interaction came with conditions attached. Do this, be that, achieve this standard. My mother was different. She'd sit with me while I drew pictures that had no purpose beyond enjoyment. She never asked if my homework was done first or if I'd practiced piano. She just sat there and watched me create things, smiling like my presence was enough. I remembered her taking me to the park on random Tuesday afternoons, no special occasion, just because the weather was nice. She never lectured me about wasting time or questioned whether I deserved the outing. Those moments felt like love. But they were so few compared to my father's constant management of my life. I wrote down 5 memories with my mother. Then I tried to list moments with my father that felt like genuine love rather than conditional approval. I came up with nothing. Every memory involved me performing correctly and him rewarding that performance. The realization made me sick because I'd done the exact same thing to Claire. I'd never just sat with her and enjoyed her company without some agenda. Every interaction was about shaping her into what I wanted her to be. Work became increasingly uncomfortable over the following weeks. My boss called me into his office and closed the door, always a bad sign. He told me the senior management position I'd been expecting would go to someone else. I started to protest, but he held up his hand and slid a piece of paper across the desk. The feedback cited personal issues affecting professional judgment and concerns about my ability to maintain appropriate boundaries. Several colleagues had apparently expressed discomfort about the lawsuit situation. He didn't say I was fired, but he made it clear my reputation had taken serious damage. I walked back to my desk feeling everyone's eyes on me. The usual lunch group didn't invite me that day, or the next day, or the day after that. I ate alone in my car, scrolling through social media and seeing my coworkers posting photos from restaurants I used to join them at. Nobody was openly hostile, but the distance was obvious. Conversation stopped when I approached the break room. People found urgent reasons to leave meetings early when I was presenting. I'd worked at this company for 12 years, and suddenly I was invisible. The isolation felt suffocating. I'd always been respected here, seen as competent and reliable. Now I was the guy who stole his daughter's car and got sued for it. The guy with control issues so bad they ended up in court. Nobody wanted to associate with that. 3 months into therapy, Brandon shifted our focus in a way that terrified me. He asked me to consider the possibility that Claire might never want a meaningful relationship with me. Not as punishment, just as her choice. He wanted me to think about how I'd build a life worth living if that happened. The question felt impossible to answer because being Claire's father had been my entire identity for 18 years. Every decision I made, every goal I set, every source of pride or purpose came from that role. Without it, I didn't know who I was. Brandon pushed me to explore interests separate from parenting. Hobbies, friendships, personal goals that had nothing to do with Claire. I couldn't think of any. My life had revolved completely around managing hers. He gave me homework to try 3 new activities over the next month, things I chose purely for myself. I sat in my empty house that night trying to remember what I enjoyed before Claire was born. I came up with nothing concrete. My entire adult life had been about being her father and controlling her development. The idea of finding purpose elsewhere felt both impossible and absolutely necessary. The youth mentoring center where I completed my community service hours occupied an old church building on the east side of town. I showed up expecting troubled kids who needed strict guidance and firm boundaries. Instead, I found teenagers dealing with genuinely difficult circumstances. Parents in prison, foster care situations, homelessness, addiction in their families. These kids actually needed the structure and support I'd forced on Claire when she didn't need it at all. I was assigned to help with homework and life skills workshops. The first kid I worked with, a 15-year-old named Marcus, asked for help with his algebra homework. I started to take over and show him the correct method, my usual approach. But something made me stop and instead ask him to show me how he was trying to solve it. He walked through his process and I realized he actually understood the concept, just made a small error in calculation. I pointed out that one mistake and watched him fix it himself. He looked proud of figuring it out. Over the following weeks, I noticed something strange happening. These kids responded well to me. They sought me out for help and actually listened when I spoke. One girl told me I was a good listener, which shocked me because I'd never thought of myself that way. Then I realized why it worked here. I had no authority over these kids. I couldn't control their choices or punish their mistakes. All I could do was listen and offer suggestions they were free to ignore. Without the power to control, I actually heard what they were saying instead of planning how to direct them. Claire had been naturally responsible and self-motivated her whole life. She never needed the level of management I forced on her. These kids at the center needed guidance and structure because their lives lacked stability. Claire's life had too much structure, too much control, no room to breathe or make her own choices. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, worried it might be something legal. But I picked up and heard a young woman's voice asking for Claire's mother. I explained she had the wrong number. There was a pause, then she said she was Harmony, Claire's roommate, and she'd grabbed the wrong contact from Claire's phone. She started to hang up, but I asked her to wait. I knew I shouldn't ask, knew it violated the boundaries Claire had set, but I couldn't help myself. I asked how Claire was doing. Harmony hesitated, clearly realizing who I was. She said Claire was doing great, making amazing grades, really happy at the school. Then she seemed to catch herself and said she had to go, ending the call abruptly. I sat there staring at my phone after she hung up. That brief conversation gave me a tiny glimpse into Claire's life, confirmation that she was thriving without me. Part of me felt relief knowing she was okay, but a bigger part felt the loss of not being someone she wanted to share her life with. She was succeeding and happy, and I wasn't part of it. Harmony's awkward exit when she realized who I was made it clear that Claire had told her roommate about our situation. I was the controlling father, the cautionary tale, the person Claire had escaped from. 6 months after I wrote the settlement check, an email appeared in my inbox from Claire's address. My hands shook opening it. The message was short and formal. She acknowledged receiving the settlement payment, said she was doing well at the school, hoped I was working on the things I needed to work on. That was it. 3 sentences. No warmth, but no anger either. She didn't invite further contact, but didn't explicitly forbid it. I read those 3 sentences probably 50 times, analyzing every word choice for hidden meaning. Was doing well at the school her way of showing she didn't need me? Was mentioning my therapy progress a sign she cared about my growth? Did the lack of explicit rejection mean she was softening? I brought the email to my next session with Brandon and showed him my analysis. He read it once and looked at me with patient concern. He explained that Claire was simply letting me know she was okay. It wasn't an invitation to resume our relationship or a sign she was ready for more contact. It was basic human decency, acknowledging the settlement and confirming she was safe. He helped me understand I was looking for hope in places it didn't exist because I desperately wanted Claire to forgive me. The email was exactly what it appeared to be, nothing more or less. Learning to accept Claire's minimal contact without demanding more felt like the hardest part of therapy. My instinct was to respond with a long message explaining everything I'd learned and how much I'd changed. Brandon coached me to write something brief instead, respecting Claire's boundaries by matching her level of engagement. I spent an hour crafting a response that was 3 sentences long, thanked her for reaching out, said I was proud of her college success, told her I was continuing to work on myself in therapy. I read it 20 times before sending it, then forced myself to close my email and not check for a reply. Brandon had warned me about becoming obsessive about Claire's responses, checking constantly for signs of connection. I tried to focus on other things, but found myself opening my email every few hours anyway. 2 weeks passed with nothing. I started to accept that Claire's email had been a one-time thing, her way of closing the loop on the settlement. Then another email arrived, even shorter than the first. She mentioned making Dean's List again and said her classes were going well. No personal details, no questions about my life, just a basic update. But she'd reached out twice now. I showed Brandon the second email, and he helped me see what was actually happening. Claire was building something new with me, but on completely different terms than before. These weren't the deep conversations I wanted, or the close relationship I'd lost. They were minimal check-ins, breadcrumbs of contact that let her maintain some connection while protecting her boundaries. I was learning that this might be all I ever got with Claire. Brief emails every few weeks, distant updates with no real intimacy, and I had to find a way to be grateful for that instead of demanding more. My therapy sessions with Brandon had settled into a routine of me defending my intentions, while he patiently challenged me to focus on impact instead. But something shifted in our session 8 months after the settlement. I walked in, and before Brandon could ask his usual opening question, I just said it. I was wrong. Not just about the car. About everything. My entire approach to parenting Claire had been wrong from the beginning. Brandon waited for me to continue. I told him I'd spent 18 years confusing control with love, fear with protection, obedience with respect. I'd made Claire's childhood about my need to feel important and necessary, rather than her need to develop independence. Every rule, every restriction, every punishment had been about maintaining my authority, not about keeping her safe or helping her grow. I stopped defending my intentions because intentions didn't matter anymore. The impact was what mattered, and my impact had been to make Claire feel trapped and controlled her entire life. Saying those words out loud felt like losing something fundamental about my identity. I'd built my entire sense of self around being a good father, and admitting I'd actually been a controlling father meant accepting I'd wasted 18 years being someone I didn't want to be. Brandon didn't celebrate my admission or praise my breakthrough. He just nodded and asked what I planned to do with this understanding. I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time, I was asking the right questions instead of defending the wrong answers. Brandon gave me a new assignment the following week. Write a letter to Claire explaining everything I understood now about how I'd failed her. But don't send it. The letter was for me, not her. I spent 3 days working on it, filling pages with specific examples of my controlling behavior and the impact it must have had on her. I wrote about the rules that had nothing to do with her safety and everything to do with my need for control. The way I dictated her appearance, her friends, her activities, her future plans, how I'd made her childhood about performing for my approval rather than discovering who she was. I wrote about the car and the tattoo and how I'd punished her for the crime of becoming an adult with her own choices. When I read the letter aloud in Brandon's office, my voice broke multiple times. He asked me what I wanted from Claire if she were to read this letter. I admitted I wanted forgiveness. I wanted her to see how much I'd changed and give me another chance at being her father. Brandon asked if that was fair to request. The question caught me off guard. He explained that Claire didn't owe me forgiveness just because I'd finally figured out what I did wrong. My growth had to be for its own sake, to become a better person, not as a strategy to win Claire back. If I was only changing to manipulate her into forgiving me, then I was still trying to control her, just with different tactics. The realization hit hard because he was right. Part of me was viewing therapy and personal growth as tools to get what I wanted from Claire. I needed to change because it was the right thing to do, regardless of whether Claire ever wanted a relationship with me again. 8 months after the settlement, Claire sent an email that made my heart race. She was willing to meet for coffee during winter break. The conditions were clear and non-negotiable. 1 hour only. Public coffee shop she would choose. Ryan would be present as her support. No discussion of our past relationship unless she brought it up. I could ask about her classes and current life, but nothing personal or emotional. I agreed immediately, typing yes before I could overthink it. Then I spent the next 3 weeks alternating between excitement and terror about this meeting. I worked with Brandon on managing my expectations and respecting Claire's boundaries during the coffee meeting. He warned me not to use the hour to apologize or explain or try to fix things. Claire had set this up as a test to see if I could interact with her without trying to control the conversation or push for more than she was offering. My job was simply to show up, listen to whatever she wanted to share, and leave when the hour ended. No pushing for future meetings, no asking when we could do this again, no trying to extend the conversation past her boundary. Just 1 hour of being present with my daughter without any agenda beyond respecting her terms. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and sat in the back corner where I could watch the door. My hands kept fidgeting with the napkin holder. Claire walked in exactly on time with Ryan right behind her, and my heart started pounding harder. She looked different, more grown up than just a few months ago, with her hair pulled back and wearing clothes I didn't recognize. Ryan's hand stayed on her lower back as they approached my table. Claire sat across from me while Ryan took the chair beside her, angled so he could see both of us. The first few minutes were awful and stiff. I asked about her classes, and she gave short answers about psychology and statistics. Ryan watched me the whole time with his arms crossed. I wanted to ask deeper questions, to know what she was really thinking and feeling, but Brandon's voice echoed in my head about listening instead of directing. Claire talked about a study group she joined and a project on family systems theory. Her voice was careful and measured, like she was talking to someone she barely knew. I caught myself about to suggest she switch to a different major with better job prospects and bit my tongue hard. Instead, I asked what she liked about psychology. Her shoulders dropped slightly, and she actually looked at me for the first time. She explained something about understanding patterns and breaking cycles, and I realized she was talking about us without saying it directly. Ryan's posture relaxed a tiny bit. I asked about campus life, and she told me about her roommate and the dining hall food, and how different college was from high school. Every word felt precious because she was choosing to share it with me. When the hour ended, Claire stood up and gathered her bag. She said this was okay, and maybe they could do it again next semester if I wanted. I said yes immediately, probably too eagerly. Ryan nodded at me, not friendly but not hostile either. They left together, and I sat there for another 20 minutes staring at my cold coffee. The drive home felt strange because I kept replaying every word Claire said, trying to find hidden meanings or signs of softening. But Brandon's next session brought me back to reality. He asked how the meeting went, and I described it as successful because Claire agreed to meet again. He pushed back gently, asking what I actually learned about Claire as a person, rather than as my daughter. I struggled to answer because I realized I'd been so focused on her agreeing to see me again that I hadn't really listened to who she was becoming. Brandon helped me see that Claire wasn't the daughter I used to direct anymore. She was a stranger I needed to get to know from scratch, and that meant letting go of all my old expectations about who she should be. He said I was grieving the relationship I thought we had while trying to build something more honest. The grief part hit hard because it meant accepting that the perfect obedient daughter I raised never really existed, just a scared kid performing to avoid my disappointment. Over the next few sessions, Brandon worked with me on finding value in small connections, instead of the constant involvement I used to demand. Brief emails where Claire shared a grade or mentioned a campus event were victories, not failures. Occasional coffee meetings where we talked about safe topics were progress, not setbacks. I had to completely redefine what a father-daughter relationship could look like when it was based on her terms instead of mine. I found a support group for parents who lost relationships with adult children through a flyer at Brandon's office. The first meeting was in a church basement with folding chairs arranged in a circle. 8 other parents sat around looking tired and sad. The facilitator asked us to share our stories, and most of the parents blamed their kids for being ungrateful or influenced by bad people. One mother talked about her daughter cutting contact over a simple disagreement about wedding plans. A father described his son choosing his wife's family over his own. Everyone nodded sympathetically at these stories, and I recognized my old self in their justifications. When my turn came, I told them the truth. I said I controlled my daughter her whole life and sold her car as punishment when she got a tattoo at 18. I explained about the lawsuit and the therapy and how I was learning that I'd been abusive without realizing it. The room went silent. 3 people looked angry, and one woman actually said I didn't belong there if I was going to side with the kids over the parents. But 2 parents stayed after the meeting ended. One man said my story made him think differently about his own situation with his son. A woman told me she appreciated my honesty because it helped her see patterns in her own behavior. Those 2 conversations meant more than all the sympathetic nods during the meeting. I kept going to the group, even though several members clearly didn't want me there, because hearing other defensive parents helped me monitor my own thinking and catch myself when I started slipping back into old justifications, Work started getting better in small ways I didn't expect. My boss called me into his office one afternoon and I tensed up, ready for bad news. Instead, he said he'd noticed changes in how I managed my team. I was asking for input instead of just giving orders. I was letting people make their own decisions and trusting them to handle problems without my constant oversight. He said the team seemed more motivated and productive since I'd backed off from micromanaging everything. I hadn't realized my therapy work was affecting my professional relationships too. During team meetings, I caught myself about to override someone's suggestion and stopped. I asked questions instead of making pronouncements. I let junior employees present their own ideas to upper management instead of taking credit or controlling the narrative. My coworkers started coming to me with questions again instead of avoiding my office. One colleague who'd been cold since hearing about the lawsuit actually invited me to lunch. The professional respect I thought I'd lost forever was slowly rebuilding because people could see I was genuinely different, not just performing temporary change to get through a crisis. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning 10 months after the settlement, and Claire's name appeared on the screen. My hands shook as I answered. Her voice was businesslike and a bit distant. She had a question about her car insurance and didn't know who else to ask. The policy was still under my name from when I'd originally set it up, and she needed to know about coverage for winter driving. I gave her the information she needed without trying to stretch the conversation or ask about her life. I kept my tone helpful and practical, the way I'd talk to anyone asking for insurance advice. She thanked me and said goodbye. The whole call lasted maybe 3 minutes. I sat staring at my phone for a long time after, replaying those 3 minutes and analyzing every word. My therapy session that week focused entirely on that phone call. Brandon celebrated it as huge progress. Claire had tested whether I could be helpful without being controlling. She'd given me a practical problem to solve, and I'd solved it without trying to use it as leverage for more contact or information about her life. He explained that these small tests were how Claire would decide if she could trust me in limited ways. If I passed enough tests by respecting her boundaries and being genuinely helpful, she might slowly expand what she was willing to share. But if I failed by trying to push for more than she offered, she'd pull back again. The phone call was a gift, and I'd handled it right by keeping it simple and respecting her purpose for calling. My court-mandated therapy year ended, but I kept seeing Brandon. The judge's requirement was fulfilled, but I finally understood how much deeper my problems went than just one incident with a car. Brandon and I started exploring my childhood and my own father's controlling behavior. My dad had used money and privileges as weapons to control my choices throughout my teenage years. He'd decided which college I could attend based on his approval of their programs. He'd threatened to cut me off financially if I dated girls he didn't like. He'd made me account for every hour of my time and every dollar I spent. I'd resented him deeply and sworn I'd never be like him. But looking at my relationship with Claire, I'd repeated almost every pattern. The same threats about taking away support. The same need to approve her choices. The same belief that my financial contribution gave me control over her life. Brandon helped me see these generational patterns I'd been blind to before. Breaking them was painful and slow work. Some sessions I left feeling worse than when I arrived, because facing these truths about myself was harder than any legal consequences. But I kept going because I was finally doing this work for myself, not as a performance to win Claire back. I was becoming someone different because being the old version of myself was no longer acceptable to me, regardless of whether Claire ever wanted a relationship again. An email arrived in April with Claire's college logo in the header. She was inviting me to Parents' Weekend in 2 weeks. My heart jumped, but then I read the full message. Ryan's parents would also be there, and we'd all attend events together as a group. She made it clear this wasn't about rebuilding our private relationship, but about including me in her college life in a limited way. I replied immediately saying I'd be there and asking if she needed anything. She responded with the weekend schedule and nothing else. I booked a hotel room near campus and spent the next 2 weeks alternating between excitement and terror. Brandon helped me prepare for meeting Raymond and Isabella properly for the first time. I needed to thank them for supporting Claire when I couldn't, and I needed to mean it sincerely. The drive to campus took 3 hours, and I rehearsed different versions of what I'd say. Claire met me in the parking lot with Ryan and his parents. Raymond was tall and solid with a cop's careful eyes. Isabella was warm but watchful. I shook their hands and said I appreciated them being there for Claire. Isabella's expression softened slightly. Raymond nodded but didn't smile. Claire looked nervous, like she was waiting for me to say something controlling or inappropriate. I followed her lead and let her direct where we went and what we did. We toured the campus and attended a presentation about study abroad programs. Ryan's parents treated me politely, but kept themselves between me and Claire most of the time. During lunch at the student union, I sat at the end of the table and listened more than I talked. Isabella asked about my work, and I answered briefly without dominating the conversation. Raymond watched me interact with Claire, clearly ready to intervene if I crossed any lines. The psychology department held presentations on Saturday afternoon, and Claire was scheduled to speak. We all filed into a classroom where maybe 20 students and parents sat waiting. Claire stood at the front with note cards and a PowerPoint presentation about family systems and boundary formation. She talked about enmeshment and differentiation and healthy versus unhealthy family dynamics. She never mentioned me by name, but I recognized pieces of our story in her examples. She described families where love was conditional on obedience and how children in those systems learned to hide their true selves. She explained boundary violations and how parents sometimes confused control with care. Every word felt aimed directly at me, even though she maintained academic distance throughout. Other students asked questions, and Claire answered with confidence and insight. Her professor praised her analysis and depth of understanding. After the presentation, Claire introduced me to her professors and friends as her father. That simple introduction without hesitation or shame meant more than she probably realized. She was claiming me publicly despite everything, letting people know I existed in her life even if our relationship was complicated. Ryan's parents stood nearby, and I saw Isabella whisper something to Raymond. He nodded, and his expression shifted slightly towards something less guarded. Sunday was the last day of Parents' Weekend, and Claire suggested we have lunch alone without Ryan present. My stomach flipped with nervousness. We went to a small cafe off campus and sat across from each other with sandwiches neither of us really ate. Claire spoke first and said she was proud of the work I'd done in therapy. She'd talked to Brandon with my permission, and he'd told her about my progress. She wasn't ready to have a close relationship and maybe never would be, but she appreciated that I'd respected her boundaries and actually changed instead of just promising to change. She said the phone call about insurance was a test, and I'd passed by keeping it simple and helpful. The coffee meeting was a test, and I'd passed by not pushing for more. Parents' Weekend was a bigger test, and so far, I was passing by letting her control the pace and boundaries. She explained that maybe someday we'd have something that felt like a real father-daughter relationship, but it would be completely different from before. It would be based on mutual respect instead of my authority. Based on her choice to include me instead of my right to control her. I told her I understood, and I'd take whatever relationship she was willing to give. She said that was the right answer, but I needed to actually mean it, not just say it to please her. We finished lunch and walked back to her dorm. She hugged me briefly before going inside, the first physical contact we'd had in over a year. The hug lasted maybe 3 seconds, but I held on to the feeling of it during the entire drive home. Brandon's office felt safe and familiar when I arrived for my session after Parents' Weekend. I told him everything about the trip, and he listened carefully. He asked how I felt, and I said hopeful but scared. Hopeful because Claire was letting me back into her life in small ways. Scared because she'd been clear she wasn't sure she wanted a close relationship with me ever. Brandon helped me sit with both feelings without trying to resolve them. He explained that rebuilding trust with Claire would take years, not months, and I had to accept that possibility. Claire had been clear about her uncertainty, and I couldn't pressure her or try to speed up her timeline. He asked what would happen if Claire decided 5 years from now that she only wanted minimal contact a few times a year. Could I accept that and still find fulfillment in my own life? The question terrified me because it meant accepting I might never have the close father-daughter relationship I'd destroyed. But Brandon pushed me to develop my own identity and purpose beyond being Claire's father. I was learning to find value in my own growth and changes, regardless of whether Claire forgave me or wanted me in her life. The work I was doing to become a better person had to be for its own sake, not as a strategy to win her back. Some days that felt impossible because my whole identity for 18 years had been wrapped up in being her father. But other days I could see glimpses of who I might become if I kept doing this work, someone who could respect boundaries and love without controlling and find purpose beyond managing other people's lives. A year passed, the settlement money was paid, therapy sessions continued weekly, and Claire's texts arrived sporadically, brief updates about classes and campus life that I read dozens of times looking for hidden meanings. Then in May, an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that made my hands shake. Freshman year celebration dinner. Claire was graduating her first year with honors and wanted me at a small dinner with Ryan's family to celebrate. She'd picked a restaurant halfway between her college and my house, neutral territory, and the invitation included specific boundaries. 2 hours, no gifts, no expectations beyond showing up. I replied within minutes accepting every condition, then spent 3 weeks anxious about what to wear, what to say, whether I'd ruin everything by saying the wrong thing. The restaurant was nicer than I expected, white tablecloths and soft lighting, and I arrived 15 minutes early, only to find Raymond and Isabella already seated at a large round table. They nodded politely when I approached, their expressions carefully neutral, and I thanked them again for supporting Claire when I couldn't. Isabella's smile softened slightly at that, and Raymond gestured to the empty chair they'd left between them and Claire's spot. When Claire walked in with Ryan, she looked different from I remembered, taller somehow, more confident in her movements. She hugged Ryan's parents first, long, comfortable embraces that showed their closeness, then turned to me with a brief nod. We sat down and Claire talked about her classes, her psychology research project, her plans for a summer internship at a youth center. I listened without offering advice or opinions, just asking questions like Brandon had taught me, and Claire actually answered them. She'd made Dean's List both semesters, joined 3 campus organizations, and started volunteering with at-risk teenagers. Everything she described showed a young woman thriving without my guidance, building exactly the kind of meaningful life I should have wanted for her all along. Raymond mentioned how proud they were of Claire, and I heard myself agreeing genuinely rather than competitively. Isabella talked about Claire coming to their house for holidays and weekend visits, and instead of feeling jealous, I felt grateful these people had given my daughter the unconditional support I'd failed to provide. When dessert arrived, Claire pulled out her phone and showed us photos from the semester, pictures of her with friends and roommates, studying in the library, at campus events. Ryan appeared in most of them, always close to Claire, and I realized I'd stopped seeing him as the enemy who manipulated my daughter. He was just someone who loved Claire and supported her choices, something I was finally learning to do. The dinner lasted exactly 2 hours as Claire had specified, and when we said goodbye in the parking lot, she told me this had been good, that maybe we could do it again next semester. Those words felt like winning the lottery. Small progress, but genuine connection on her terms. Summer arrived and Claire's texts became more frequent. Nothing deep or emotional, but regular updates about her internship working with teenagers at a community center. She'd send photos of art projects the kids made or funny stories about situations at work, and I'd respond with brief, supportive messages that didn't try to give advice or direction. One text mentioned Ryan getting accepted to a program at Claire's college for the fall, and I replied saying I was happy for them both, meaning it. Another text asked my opinion about her sophomore year schedule, an actual question seeking my input, and I gave straightforward thoughts without trying to make decisions for her. Brandon helped me understand that Claire was testing whether I could be helpful without being controlling, building trust slowly by seeing if I'd respect her autonomy. Ryan stayed constant in her life through all these updates, his name appearing regularly in her stories, and I'd stopped viewing his presence as a threat to my relationship with Claire. He was someone who genuinely loved and supported my daughter, and that was something to appreciate rather than resent. My second year of therapy with Brandon ended in August, and we agreed to transition from weekly sessions to monthly maintenance meetings. I'd made real progress understanding my control issues, recognizing the patterns from my own childhood that I'd repeated with Claire, developing healthier ways of relating to people without trying to direct their choices. But Brandon reminded me that change wasn't a destination with a finish line. It was ongoing work I'd need to keep doing. Some days I still felt the instinct to give advice when Claire shared something, the urge to suggest better approaches or point out potential problems. Those moments were less frequent now, but they still appeared and I'd learned to notice them and choose different responses. Brandon said that awareness was the real progress, catching myself before acting on controlling impulses, and that I'd probably struggle with those instincts forever. The work wasn't about becoming someone completely different. It was about developing better tools for managing my tendencies and making conscious choices rather than automatic reactions. We talked about my identity beyond being Claire's father, the hobbies and interests I'd neglected for years while focusing entirely on raising her. I'd started volunteering at the youth center where I'd done community service, actually enjoying working with teenagers without the pressure of being their parent. Brandon celebrated that as evidence of growth, finding purpose in helping others without needing to control their outcomes. My birthday arrived in September, a day I usually spent alone since Claire had stopped acknowledging it 2 years ago. I was making dinner when my phone rang with Claire's number, and I answered expecting a brief text-style conversation. Instead, she actually called, her voice clear and warm in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. She wished me happy birthday and asked about my day, then told me about her first week back at the school and her new classes. We talked for 20 minutes about her life, my therapy progress, cautious plans for maybe visiting campus for Parents' Weekend if she decided she wanted that. Claire said she was glad I was working on myself and that she could see real changes in how I interacted with her, that I'd actually respected her boundaries instead of just promising to. Our relationship would never be what it was before, she made that clear. But we were building something more honest based on respect rather than my authority. She didn't need me to be the father who controlled everything anymore, but maybe there was space for me to be someone who supported her choices and celebrated her independence. I told her I was learning to be grateful for whatever connection she was willing to have, that I was finding my own identity beyond being her father, while staying open to whatever relationship she wanted. When we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the phone and feeling something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Not the satisfaction of having things under control, but the quiet peace of accepting things as they were.